It's a god-awful small affair to the girl with the mousy hair, and her mother is yelling low, and her father has told her to go, but her friend is nowhere to be seen as she walks through her sunken dream to the seat with the clearest view, and she's hooked to the silver screen, but the film is a standing bore, 'cause she's lived it 10 times or more. She could spit in the eyes of fools as they ask her to focus on sailors fighting in the dance hall. Oh man, let those cavemen go. It's the freakiest show. Take a look at the low man beating up the wrong guy. Oh man, wonder if he'll ever know. He's in the best-selling show. Still alive on.
That was David Bowie, Life on Mars, recorded 23rd of March 1976. I'm Stephen Coates. This is the Bureau of Lost Culture, recorded 8th of October 2021. I don't know about you, but I mean, it's very difficult, I think, to really believe that David Bowie is dead. You know, a countercultural hero of mine anyway. He had so many persona that he killed off, that it's like that Bob Dylan song, Joey. He ain't dead, he's just asleep. It's almost like he's out there somewhere, circling the planet like Major Tom. Anyway, the reason that I played Life on Mars, that version of Life on Mars at the beginning, was because that was from an illegal bootleg recording. And the subject of this week's episode is that countercultural artifact, the bootleg vinyl record. And this is a show that we recorded at Soho Radio in the pre-Bureau of Lost Culture days. One of 5 we made around the theme of our X-Ray audio project. A project dedicated to bootleg records, but bootleg records made in the Soviet Union of forbidden music and cut onto X-ray film. The Bureau of Lost Culture is dedicated to digging up lost and half-remembered stories, so I thought we might dig up one of our own and give it a new airing, particularly because in the next episode we're going to feature the subject of the illicit use of musical recordings to make new tracks via sampling. And we've got 2 very special sampling guests to guide us through that wonderful subject. But the bootlegging onto vinyl record was a phenomena that emerged in the heady days of the 60s, lasted right through to the 90s. You could call it a countercultural entrepreneurial activity that, given the existence of the internet, has been rendered almost completely obsolete. So let's travel back through time to 2018, when this programme first aired. I'm sitting here with my friend and partner in crime, the photographer Paul Hartfield.
And Stephen.
And our old friend, vinyl nut and cultural commentator, Travis Elborough, author of the book The Long Player Goodbye. Great book, a sort of pay-on to the vinyl record. A little bit premature with the title, Travis, as I'm sure many people have reminded you.
Perhaps you'd have had a question mark.
That would have been a good idea. It's a great book still, though, actually, isn't it? Because it's a love letter to vinyl, isn't it, actually?
It charts the history of the creation of vinyl and the LP and the album.
Right, and of course vinyl didn't die, but I think you can probably say that one thing which is now dead, pretty much, is the bootleg record. But I wanted to say something because yesterday, as I mentioned earlier, we were in here talking about the flexi disc, and young Will, Soho Radio engineer, came into the studio and he picked up one of our collection of flexi discs and he said, "What's this?" Of course, we just assumed that, of course, people would know what a flexi disc was, but maybe for some of the younger audience, Travis, you could explain what is a bootleg record?
Well, a bootleg record is a record that is often an illicit record. I mean, well, maybe we should unpick this a bit. I mean, there's the bootleg, but according to the BPI, all bootlegs are essentially pirated material. They are illegal or unauthorized recordings that are released not by the by the artists themselves or by the record company, but they're released by possibly fans or people on the make, aggrieved former lovers, disbarred former band members, whoever was particularly interested in putting these records out. But I mean, the word bootleg comes from sort of brewing, illegal liquor. So the idea was that you'd put, a still of corrupted whiskey in your boot as a way of disguising it. And the bootleg record, I mean, I suppose the thing is there are lots of different forms of the bootleg. There might be the recording of a live performance, which hasn't been released officially and might have been done either off the sound desk, or it might have been done covertly, with a tape machine hidden in a bag or a jacket or a microphone stored away. Then there are releases of what might be session work, where, say, an artist goes into a studio, records certain tracks, doesn't use all of them, and doesn't release all of them. So these are kind of liberated for the fans and put out into the world on a bootleg copy. And then there are lots of, a big source of bootlegs in the rock and roll heyday of the 60s and 70s and into the 80s were FM radio broadcasts. Lots of artists would record sessions, like, obviously famously the John Peel sessions, but also live concerts would be recorded in America. FM radio was a huge thing, and many artists recorded hour-long live sets which were then broadcast on radios and which people then taped. And then would issue them on record, because you would never hear them again otherwise.
Right, and I mean, we're going to really concentrate for the next hour or so on the bootleg on the record. For sure, there's lots of other stuff too. In the context of the X-Ray Audio project, the Soviet bootleggers, I don't think they called themselves that at the time, music lovers, I think they probably called themselves, they were actually could only fit 3 minutes on a record, of course, and they were really what we would in some ways called pirates. And you brought it up then because we are in the area of piracy, and as far as as you said, the labels are concerned, the major labels and the BPI, it's all piracy. But I've got for you and Paul, I've got a little list of questions, and I'm going to ask you whether these are good or bad pirates, whether they are allowed or not. You see, because at one end, the way I see it is that you've got a pirate flag waving over the top, right? And on the left-hand side, imagine a dollar or a pound sign. It's just being done for the money. And on the right-hand side, you've got a pulsating heart. It's being done for love, okay? And all this stuff, I think, is somewhere along this scale. It's a sort of grey area, right? But let me give you this, right? So what about a complete counterfeit? It's just a version of an artist's album, vinyl or CD, but made illegally in a dodgy pressing plant and sold cheaper.
You're already loading this, Stephen, with the word in a dodgy pressing plant. It's like it's not a nice pressing plant; it's a dodgy pressing plant. It's made in a
sold, and it's being sold cheaper. Is that?
That's highly illegal.
We know it's illegal, but is it right or wrong?
I would go with the wrong. But then we were saying earlier, we got a Russian pressing here of a Pink Floyd. They probably couldn't get it, so. Right. There's another argument. There's plenty of sides to each.
Well, one of my stories about Russia is that when I went there in sort of to play with the Real Tuesday World in about 2007 or something, our host took me to the flea market, as they did with all the British people who are over there, or Americans, and proudly took me to this store where there's a gigantic store where they had just knockoffs of every Western album you could imagine. Quite nicely done. The printing was a bit odd, and if it had been a digipack, they put it in a jewel case. And they even had a Real Tuesday World album in there, because I'd actually had a track in an Orange Juice ad a few months previously. I was rather warmed to see my own album there, but rather saddened to see that they hadn't sold very many of them. But I mean, that's a knockoff, isn't it? So or a counterfeit, we could say. Now, what about the illegal download? So the new Radiohead album's coming out. It's leaked and somebody puts it up ahead of time just for anybody to download for free. Is that, Travis, is that right or wrong?
I mean, again, it's really about intention, isn't it? If the artist didn't want it released at that point and wanted you to pay for it, then as far as the artist and the record company is concerned, then that's a bad thing to do. But obviously for the fans, expecting the new release and very keen to hear it, then that becomes the fan's justification. And lots of bootleggers, in a way, justify their actions under the grounds that they are just keen, and want to hear this stuff.
Well, what about after the album's out officially, and somebody just sticks it up on a torrent site or something to download for free? Is that okay?
I'd probably say no. I mean, it's Radiohead. They don't need the money, do they?
Okay,
I mean, that's the thing about. I think there's an interesting argument as well with a band like Radiohead, who obviously then released their own album in a sort of quasi bootleggy way, or just making it available for free and then pay as you want, and then people still bought the physical object when it came out later anyway. Right. But you have to be an act of a particular stature for that to really pay off.
Let me give you some easier ones, okay? I think 'cause I think these are on the sort of maybe on the light side when it comes in Star Wars terms. So what about the concert recording, the early demo before the artist made it, or the outtake from studio sessions, or a radio session, as you said earlier? Is that okay to put that out?
I think it's a good thing. As a Beach Boys fan, you can get hours and hours, in fact days of outtakes. I love that stuff. I love it. It tells you how it was recorded. You can hear layers. You can hear it without bass. You can hear it without cello. You can hear it separate vocal takes. If I say God Only Knows, we've heard that, we're done. Still a beautiful song. You hear another version of it without a bass line, it becomes new again.
Right, so
I love it.
So we're in fan territory,
for me.
Right?
And I've paid for those.
Yeah.
I have got. Should I say? Yes, I've got a fair box of probably illicit recordings, but they've since been released on different box sets, so I bought those as well. So.
Okay, I'm going to send the BPI your address.
I mean,
and they're going to come
the Beach Boys are an interesting case as far as fan worship as well. It's obviously that famously the album Smile didn't appear, and so therefore there were many bootleggers who made their own versions of Smile, putting together the tracks and the studio sessions as they had, and so you could hear the album which hadn't been available, and so that was a means. So it was fulfilling a gap within the market.
Yeah, I'm going to come back to this subject and more testing questions, ethical questions for you two in a second, but because I want to hear some music. And Travis, actually, you mentioned it earlier, that the heyday of the bootleg for sure was the late 60s, 70s, 80s. But in fact, and people often think it began there, but I forget about the Soviet people who were in sort of 40s and 50s. It went back much earlier, didn't it? And your first selection, in fact, is a bootleg on a wax cylinder. Let's have a quick listen. Right, that was Joanna Gadsden in 1902. Now, Travis, why that's on a wax cylinder? That's amazing. Why is that a bootleg?
Well, I mean, I suppose it's a thin line, but the person who recorded that was a man called Lionel Mapleson, who was the librarian at the New York Metropolitan Opera, and he was actually given a wax cylinder machine by Edison himself. And Edison obviously originally thought that cylinders were used for dictation. But Lionel decided quite quickly that he was going to use this machine to record segments from the opera performances as they were on. And this was obviously quite a cumbersome thing to do, to wheel this thing out and have it by the side of the stage. And obviously the cylinders themselves only last for a couple of minutes. So he collected a series of snippet recordings. I mean, some of them are hilariously bad, but then for sociological reasons they become immensely fascinating, because you can hear people moving scenery around in a few of them, and and these other little ephemeral details. So I mean, he didn't really make them commercially available. So he's not really a bootlegger, but the recordings were done sort of illicitly. It wasn't really sanctioned that he should be recording them. And again, this legal matter. I mean, as far as terms of copyright, at that point, the thing that was copyrighted was sheet music, and the live performance you obviously paid to hear. But obviously, with the coming of phonographs and then records, they then have to kind of extend the copyright onto the recording. And in America, there's a strange anomaly within the copyright law that records themselves weren't copyrighted technically.
Right, well, copyright law is incredibly complicated anyway, and when it comes to music, it's super complicated, isn't it? And then, of course, you've got the federal versus, national thing in the US. But we'll come back to the live recording thing in a minute, because that's a big part of bootlegging, of course, was illicit live recordings. I just want to do a bit more music, so let's just skip forward to another one of your choices, and this is Judy Garland, and again, it's this bootleg didn't start at all in the 60s, and in fact, I think Variety were the first people to use the word bootleg with regard to records rather than booze.
Yes, I mean, this is another element about albums. A big thing in albums in the first period are show tunes and also soundtracks. But the thing about soundtracks often were that they wouldn't necessarily be the exact soundtrack, because there might be issues about rights of getting particular singers where they could sing on the soundtrack, but they were under contract by a different record company, so they couldn't be on the soundtrack album. So often you'd have a kind of cobbled together soundtrack, or the soundtrack would be recorded separately. This is an interesting case because this is Annie Get Your Gun, where Judy Garland was originally to star in the film, but had a breakdown and so didn't appear in the film and was replaced in the film. So this is a soundtrack album of, in a way, of a film that never existed, because it's a pieced together soundtrack of Judy Garland singing the numbers from Annie Get Your Gun, which was never seen.
Folks are dumb where I come from, they ain't had any learning. Still they're happy as can be, doing what comes naturally. Doing what comes naturally. Folks like us could never fuss with schools and books and learning. Still we've gone from A to Z, doing what comes naturally. Doing what comes naturally. Oh, you don't have to know how to read or write when you're out.
That's excellent, and of course would have been much appreciated by the legions of her fans.
Friends
right?
of Dorothy.
Friends of Dorothy,
would be
exactly.
enormously pleased to receive that.
And I think whether the film company or the record label objected to that, I mean, it's difficult to see that as a sort of act of violation, isn't it, of anything really. And I guess I remember when I used to live in Notting Hill, I used to go down Portobello Market, and if you walked along the Westway, there was a guy, and he was always playing a tambourine, and he had these sort of CDs of like rare sort of Philly soul, and whether or not it was available, he just had a great record collection, and they're probably on 45s, and he put together CDs from it, and it felt like a sort of curated in some way. There was a sort of creative input into it, you know. So I don't know, does that sound all right to you, Paul? Does people to do that and sell them?
It sounds good to me. I think we've all been guilty of that at some point. It's the same as just giving a tape to your mates, isn't it, really?
Yeah,
it's like, I found this, I've discovered this, is amazing. You're sharing.
Right,
you know?
but BPI, of course, in the old days used to say that home taping was killing music. With the big pirate sign on it, stamped on it, wasn't it? You know, that you were harming the artists in some way. That's pretty unlikely, isn't it, that you're harming the artist, Travis?
Well, I mean, they would probably argue that you're putting out... Well, there are a couple of arguments, aren't there? One is that the sound quality of the release that may not be as good as the official releases.
Let's come back to that one in a minute. That's a good one.
They would argue, in a sense, that because the artist themselves hasn't licensed, it hasn't agreed to it, then it's essentially, you know, the artists exist to... As a performer with their own career, where they may have their own sort of narrative about what they want their music to, you know, to build on and so on. And so the release of this is embarrassing. I mean, you have classic non-bootleg things where, you know, David Bowie is famously, you know, deeply embarrassed when his old record label released The Laughing Gnome at the height of his kind of, you know, Ziggy Stardust pomp.
Is that right? Was that right of them to do that?
I think so, because it's a fantastic record.
Good. So speaking of David Bowie, so that first, see, that's interesting, because the very first thing that we played, which was Life on Mars, which was, you know, a brilliant recording, and I mean, he sounded on top of his game, didn't he? It's Live at the Coliseum, and that's it. It's absolutely amazing record, and of course, it was officially released, later in 2010 or something, a long time later. And so there's a whole thing, isn't there? Would it have been officially released if the bootleg hadn't come out? You know, with all these outtakes that, you know, on Beatles anthologies and Dylan anthologies and stuff, would they have been released? In fact, if there hadn't been bootleg releases?
There's almost, you could see it in official releases as well. Like, say something like The Who's Live at Leeds. The design of that cover is purposely made to look like a bootleg. It piggybacks on that, and throughout the 70s, there's a huge market in live albums, which arguably only really exist, I suspect, to stop the bootleggers,
or to cash in
on the bootleg. So it's a very interestingly symbiotic kind of relationship. I mean, the Rolling Stones famously, there's Liver Than You'll Ever Be, which is a famous live album that they was recorded on several concerts on their tour of America in 1969, which features the new guitarist Mick Taylor. a little while, that's a bootleg. Around the same time, they release a live album called Get Your Yah-Yahs Out, and most of the critical opinion is that the bootleg is a better record. It captures the Stones at their more kind of vigorous live, less produced.
Sounding pretty hot, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a bit dirty, but it sounds very vibey, doesn't it?
Mm.
And I mean, the story about that, which is quite interesting, because of course that was the second massive bootleg for Ken and Dub, who kicked off their career with a Dylan bootleg. We'll talk about it in a bit. And Dub apparently recorded that by just pointing a shotgun mic at the PA at the concert. Seemed to get away with it.
No one saying, "What you got this big mic for?" Then,
yeah, exactly. And then, of course, because I suppose people weren't really aware of bootlegs at that time. It's quite early on.
Yeah,
and then apparently as well, when they went to press it, they were pressing it at a pressing plant who was doing it for them at the same time as they were pressing the next Stones official album, and the people at the pressing plant didn't question why these two hippies seem to have hold of these Rolling Stones tapes. Amazing stuff. So, they probably did a service in a way, didn't they? In some way, certainly to the fans. I mean, the record label would agree that, but they did a service.
I think we, in a way, we should. That being pretentious about it, we need to put it into some sort of context. This is the late '60s, and there's an idea in a way that rock music and pop music is a cultural phenomenon, and it's still looked down upon by quote unquote mainstream society. It's still considered degenerate and daring and a bit dangerous. And bootlegs are, the idea of there's both a political and a musical and cultural underground, which will be connected also to taking drugs, which are illegal as well. And the bootleg record fits in nicely with that countercultural thing. You buy it from underneath the culture. You often buy it from behind the counter. It's not on front. You have to ask for it or find it in a particular shop. So the bootleg neatly segues into, or segues into, what am I talking about? That neatly segues into, the bootleg neatly segues into this lifestyle of, that you're outside the law, you're slightly outside the law. But, by smoking dope in America or in Britain in the late 60s, you are a criminal. You can be arrested. And rock music and funk and soul and other kinds of music are still looked down on.
I think it's a very good point. I think because when you discover, if I use another example like the Smiths or something, it's your band. They become big. You go back, you try and find everything they've ever done. You find a bootleg, they become your band again, because not many people have got that issue. Yeah. So I think it is the ownership and the fandom.
Definitely. And I think
it didn't stop me buying anything.
Yeah.
Still bought everything.
Well,
so that's the argument.
And one of the arguments, of course, which was always used against bootlegs, well, against bootleggers anyway, is that they were competing with the official releases. The idea that, you might buy the Smiths bootleg and you wouldn't buy the official Smiths album. Well, that was just ludicrous, wasn't it?
Doesn't make any sense. Yeah.
It was the fans who bought the bootlegs, wasn't it?
Well, and also there's an element of fan club exchanges. I mean, certainly Frank Sinatra, like small local Frank Sinatra fan clubs would exchange fan club only records, which would be recordings of maybe radio broadcasts or radio acetates, which they would share among that group. And I think that sort of subculture of exchanging tapes and all the rest of it, which it has its, I suppose, is at its pinnacle through a band like the Grateful Dead, who encouraged the sort of taping of their concerts and actually have someone doing it. Betty, who is manning the boards, recording stuff, and that becomes part of the Grateful Dead's legion of fans exchange tapes, and that is part of their identity of being a Deadhead, is attending the concerts, exchanging the tapes, as well as buying the official releases.
Right, and they were sort of radical in that sense, weren't they? Because they were so sort of in such a community with their own fans that they were encouraging the bootlegging of their own concerts, whatever the record company said about it. But generally speaking, there's been a theme of that, is that artists themselves have often, not always, but been quite sympathetic to bootleggers. Yeah. Apparently Mick Jagger and Keith Richards used to go into record stores in the States and look for Stones bootlegs, and they would just pick them up and walk out with them, because nobody's going to say, oh, you can't steal that, right? Because you just stole it off me.
Yeah.
And people love to do that. Not all artists, of course, that was the case. In fact, let me just read you a little quote and see if you can tell me who you think said this. And this is an artist who definitely didn't want their own stuff bootlegged. I've just obtained the address of a man who, against all my requests, bootlegged the Kitchen concert in New York, and I'm considering exactly what to do. The traditional approach is that 3 very large burly men go round and inflict a considerable amount of muscular damage upon the body of the person who's bootlegged this. That's not my approach. I don't like having the idea of working through the traditional dinosaur structure of copyright law, understandably, but I sense that I may have to do it, because in a situation where normal requests from one human being to another aren't met by a decent, honourable response, one's violated. This situation simply can't go on. Anybody got any ideas who said that? Right, well, that was Robert Fripp, who's notoriously against bootleg. Personally, I wouldn't buy an official King Crimson record, never mind an unofficial one, but he's got the right to say that. I do.
It's probably at the moment he's putting out, King Crimson putting out these monster CDs.
Issue after issue after.
But then I suppose he's a control freak, and he's curating those very carefully, and that's that, of course, is the issue, isn't it? But listen, I want to just move on to a different kind of bootleg, just briefly. We might come back to the live stuff in a minute, but we have this Beatles, of course, along with Dylan and the Stones, the most bootleg band in the world, and not just live concerts, because they didn't do that many apart from early on, of course, but studio outtakes. Let me just play this first, and then Travis can tell us about it.
Don't dig no Pakistanis taking all the people's jobs. Oh, get back! Get back! Get back to where you once belonged. Get back! Get back! Get back to where you once belonged. Born in a little, was a Puerto Rican, born in another. Party folks around, say party on Mohegan, living in the USA. Get back! Oh, get back! Get back to where you once belonged. Get back! Get back! Get back to where you once belonged.
Travis, that's no Pakistanis by the Beatles. That's a worrying sort of record. Please explain it to us.
Well, it was part of the Get Back sessions, and there was another track also called Back to the Commonwealth. I think it's one of the other names of it. But it's supposed to be, or so they have subsequently claimed, it was supposed to be a riposte to Enoch Powell. It's supposed to be taking the mickey out of Enoch Powell's Rivers of Blood speech about sending people back. But obviously you can see that many people might just take that, and certainly right-wing people since have taken it just on face value, that it was intended to convey that sentiment. But I think it's fairly obvious the Beatles were not racist, and we're not. But quite, they've never released. It was left off any of the kind of anthology compilations, shall we say?
We'll give them the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, again, and also it was during. I mean, it's in the record anyway. I mean, what becomes "Let It Be" the album, that it's their attempt to do a band Dylan, basement tapes idea that they're going to go back to basics and just sort of jam as a band and write material. So of course this is really a muck around jam.
But I mean, who did the person who recorded that made a possibly made a copy of it and then slip it out. I mean, did they do the band a service? Did they do the public a service? Is it a culturally important piece of audio?
I mean, in the context of the late 60s, it's an interesting piece of a fragment of history, a slightly uncomfortable listen, it has to be said. But in a way, the intentions behind it, I think, or them recording it, or the sentiment that I think Paul McCartney was trying to express, was one of disgust with power. But obviously, it's very hard for that to be.
But it seems like he hadn't written the lyrics, so it's a train of thought.
Yeah.
And it's just stuff coming out of the air.
Yeah.
So, I think we'd all, if we go in front of a microphone like now, we're going to say many things we don't actually mean. So I'd allow him that. I'd give him that. I don't think there's any intention behind that.
As a recording artist myself, of course, I would absolutely cringe if some of my demos and musings were not that they're going to be, because there isn't the appetite for them. But I mean, should they be in some alternate universe, I would just cringe. I mean, it must be awful.
For years, Steve.
Well, I mean, that you were hitting there really on the artist's position on lots of bootlegs. And most famously, the sort of the Great White Wonder, which is the first sort of rock. It's the record that opens the floodgates of bootlegging.
Yeah, well, that's a perfect segue. Actually, let me just start off with some music, and then we can talk about that amazing record. Okay.
If your memory serves you well, we were going to meet again and wait. So I'm going to unpack all my things and sit before it gets too late. No man alive will come to you with another tale to tell. And you know that we shall meet again if your memory serves you well. Wheels on the line, rolling down the road. There's no if I my next again. This wheels
So, Wheels on Fire from the Great White Wonder, the first massive bootleggers, Travis was saying. Now, the fascinating thing about that, Travis, is that in a strange way it was the first massive one, but also in some ways it was the bootleg which defined it all, wasn't it? I mean, 23 tracks, 2 from early Columbia demos, 2 from, or at least 2 anyway, from even before that, before he was signed. So demos, studio outtakes from the Highway 61 sessions, a session from the folk magazine Broadside, one from Dylan's appearance on the Johnny Cash show, and then of course, in a way, the heart of it is these 7 tracks which he's recorded at the Big Pink or somewhere up in New York State. Woodstock, after his motorbike accident, and him and the band have holed up there. This is not an official thing. He's recorded demos, not for his own next album, but for his publishers.
That's right.
He's written songs. Then which like songs for other people to cover. They put them on an acetate, which is a very basic sort of vinyl record.
14 songs.
14 songs
for his publisher,
and it's circulated amongst the industry only. Right, that's the idea. Then what happens?
Well, it sneaks out, and some of them start being played on FM radio stations in the United States, and particularly on the West Coast, the sort of wild west of bootlegging, and people are keen to hear them. I mean, essentially, Dylan he's had his motorbike crash. He's sort of withdrawn, and when he re-emerges, he's a sort of more of a countrified singer. He's doing the John Wesley Harding album, and then after that, Nashville Skyline, which sounds quite different to the pre-motorcycle crash Bob Dylan. But in that time, some of these songs that he's placed with his publishers have been released. Peter, Paul and Mary, Julie Driscoll obviously doing Wheels on Fire, The Byrds, recording some of these songs which were demoed. and there's a kind of a gap between the Dylan as was Dylan of the of Blonde on Blonde and and Highway 61 Revisited, and the new countrified version of Dylan, and alongside the rumours that he's been replaced by a by a fake and he's died or whatever other nonsense stuff. There's a hunger for the for something which is perhaps a little bit more like the older Dylan, and because they've heard these songs, they realise there must be some, and now these recordings are starting to be played on FM radio. Essentially, Rolling Stone runs a piece called The Basement Tapes, the lost Dylan album, about these recordings which have taken place, and that sort of feeds a deep hunger within the fan base for an album of these recordings. And so two gentlemen in California step into the breach and put together this Great White Wonder compilation album, which is not really all the Basement Tapes at all. It's like a hodgepodge of all sorts of
they
outtakes.
sort of curated it, didn't they?
Yeah.
I mean, Ken and Dub, and Ken's
right.
dad was, ran a record store,
Yeah.
so he sort of knew the business.
They were in distribution, I think, as well. They had a hand in the kind of
and
market.
Dub a huge Dylan fan
Yeah.
himself, and where they got the other stuff from, who knows? But they did sort of curate it, didn't they?
Yeah.
Stories is that they pressed up 300 copies, as young fans sort
Yeah.
of thing. Gave them to somebody to see if he could sell them. And he came back sort of half an hour later saying the first record store, official record store he walked into in maybe Santa Monica or something, had bought the whole lot. And then, of course, they just keep pressing it and pressing it. And the story of that record, which is amazing, is then, of course, when people catch on that it's selling, other people start bootlegging their bootleg. And, of course, when you're in the bootleg world, there aren't any ethics.
Yeah, exactly.
So other people start bootlegging it. And, in fact, this record gets bootlegged repeatedly.
And new versions of Troubled Troubadour. I mean, there are the Flower. There are kind of all sorts of different versions of some which are closer to the Basement Tapes, i.e. that contain more of those acetate demos and less of the recorded in his girlfriend's bedroom stuff. But it's a sense in a way that because Dylan isn't giving them the music they want, again, the fans are kind of stepping into the breach, and there's throughout Dylan's career, obviously, there's this whole thing of, he moves from being a folk singer to an electric thing, which annoys his fans, and there's people who think that's the proper Dylan, and then there's the electric Dylan, and there's the proper Dylan, but now he's gone country. Wish he could just play the electric stuff again. So the fans think of themselves as kind of moral agents that they're doing this. Also, this it's that idea that to be a Dylan fan is to be largely an obsessive during this era, and so they want everything. And because Dylan's production has slowed, shall we say, and is producing material which is a little odder. There's a pent up hunger for this kind of material, but in a way it opens the floodgates for bootlegs in the late 60s. In 1969, I think actually, Great White Wonder comes out. Suddenly it emerges that there is a huge market for recordings by kind of underground rock artists, session work and live concerts, and so it creates a boom in the bootleg within the rock and roll and the rock.
Yeah, and
market.
it starts with Dylan, Stones, obviously Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd,
Exactly.
all the Eagles, all those massive bands get hugely bootlegged, and of course the record companies are all over it, and there's lots of things published about that Dylan's suing bootleggers. I don't think Dylan was suing anybody. It was the record label actually that sued them. They even, when it came to the UK, it crossed over the Atlantic, and I've got a case here where it says that a 20-year-old bootlegger turned over his tapes after the Dylan LP began circulating in England. And copyright sleuths have busted England's first bootleg record producer for making a one-disc version of Dylan's Great White Wonder album. David Steele, the 20-year-old founder and president of FD Productions, the bootleg company, sounds official, isn't it? Met with officers of the MCPS, turned over the original GWW tape and his master tape, paid most of the 360-degree royalties demanded, and promised not to do it again.
I mean, in America, there's one bootlegger guy called Rubber Dubber who sent copies of his bootleg albums to the Rolling Stone to be reviewed, and again took a kind of provocative stance of saying that he was putting the music, he was connecting to the fans directly, and cutting out the middleman of the record company. and use that as a kind of moral argument. And another moral argument which some bootleggers made as well was that often because they were only, a 4-person team, it meant that greater equity was shared out within the company, because rather than in a big multinational where only certain people got a certain percentage of the spoils.
Of course, they didn't stop. All this stuff didn't stop the bootleg tapes, as they were being, issued as the basement tapes, but in '75 by Dylan's record company. And in fact, that basement tapes then went on to be 13 albums worth of outtakes.
Well,
live
this is it,
stuff,
because the
and
basement tapes isn't really the basement tapes either. Half of it's some of it's band demos that they'd done somewhere else. So
but it generated a market. So you could say in a way that the bootleg itself actually did Dylan quite a lot of good. He's famously said to have said when the basement tapes official record was released that he was surprised anybody bought it because they thought they already had it.
Yeah.
Because the Great White Wonder had been doing the rounds. Let's just jump over here back to the UK. Well, actually, of course, this is recorded in Nassau, but it is David Bowie again. And there's an argument as well which the record companies put forward, which would be interesting to hear you two. Paul referred to it earlier, the issue of sound quality. Now, let's just start off with this one, okay? Okay, you got it? Keep that in your head. Is that all right? And then what about this one? Which version of Suffragette City is better? Paul, first or second?
I'm going to say the first, because that's the... I'm assuming that isn't the official issue.
That's the bootleg version,
bootleg,
Travis?
Yeah.
Well, to be honest, the second sounds clearer, to be honest. It's punchier.
It sounds clearer, that's the point,
Yeah.
isn't it? And of course it does sound clearer and cleaner, but I reflect on this sometimes when I'm sitting on the 77 bus on Wandsworth Road, and there's sort of the kids on there with their phones out, and they're often listening to music, not with headphones, but just coming out of the phone. And it sounds terrible, but it doesn't matter. And the thing about the Soviet bootlegs, just to sort of go back to them, is that a lot of the records that we've heard and got, which were cut by these Soviet bootleggers, jazz, rock and roll records, the sound quality is absolutely appalling because of the technique. Maybe third, fourth generation copy, but also recording on an X-ray. It's not easy, as Paul knows all too well. And they didn't last very long and stuff. And yet we talked to old guys in Moscow and played them those records back, and they light up. Why? Because it was the music that they wanted to listen to, the music that they loved. The sound quality didn't really matter that much, actually.
Well, I guess if I was a young Bowie fan in the 1970s, which I suppose I was, it's very young, but then and the only way of hearing that live concert, perhaps I did. Another thing, key thing is some people as well, is if they attended that concert, having a recording of that. I mean, that's a huge thing. Certainly, when I was a teenager in the 80s, cassette, bootleg cassettes of gigs were a huge current. If you'd been to a particular gig, you could get, you might be able to find a bootleg copy of it if you hadn't bootlegged it yourself, I suppose. So I think, you would have wanted it at any price, wouldn't you? Really, whether it sounded as like the first version, the bootleg one, or cleaned up official one, you would probably, as a fan, want the official one eventually to come out so you could hear it in a better quality. But as a keen fan, you would probably put up with the bootleg and the sound quality because it would mean something to you. It would have that totemic element.
It's got more of a nostalgia to it, hasn't it? It's not sterilised. It's not that kind of half and half. Whereas the original one, you can feel like you're kind of there.
Yeah.
If you were there, it feels like you're there again.
I mean, I love one of the things I like about that. Some of the bootlegs is often the ephemeral noise. So people talking in the crowd. I mean, obviously the famous cases, official releases like the Velvet Underground's Live at Max's, where you can hear Jim Carroll asking for some Quaaludes quite audibly on the tape. And there's a Cure one, which became an official release as well, of an early concert they do at the Rocket in Crawley, where he's doing 10:15 on a Saturday night, and he does his guitar solo. And you hear this girl, and he makes that kind of chunky noise on his guitar, and you can hear a girl say, "He's broken his guitar." It's just those kind of details. I think that those are the key things with bootlegs.
I think I can say the same. The bootleg I've got of David Sylvian in Spain, he introduces, but you never really hear him speak, and there's this one beautiful moment where he introduces the drummer, and my drummer is Steve Jansen, my brother. And it's a very twee thing, but as a fan, it's like, whoa, and it fills you with emotion. It's like, that's my brother playing the drums, and you rarely see a glimpse of
I think
any kind of human side.
So as a fan, see, that's interesting. So that's a love thing, isn't it? Is that you know this artist really well. You know his history, so you get this little glimpse into his personal life, actually, in a way there. And that was always part of it with the bootleg, wasn't it? Is that you are proud to be a super fan and spend the extra money, because bootlegs are often quite expensive, on this product. Even if the sound quality was poor, you were sort of on an insider club, and also you were seeing behind the curtain, because I suppose that's the other thing which is easy to forget in these days of YouTube, where every moment of an artist's life is being documented. This was a time when somebody like Dylan or Bowie, they were almost like mythical creatures. Their image was completely controlled by the record label. Their output was completely controlled by the record label, both in terms of photographs, film, and of course music. So if you got the bootleg, it was like a sort of entree to their world behind the curtain.
It's a back channel, isn't it?
A back channel, yeah.
You're bypassing all of those kind of traditional media outlets. I think that's the rebel thing again. The idea of you've signed up for the rock and roll underground in a sense, and part of that will be a mode of dressing, a mode of behaviour, and maybe a mode of listening where where bootleg records are part of that.
And it becomes yours again, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I'm going to play a little bit of another one of Travis's here, because this is a rehearsal at one of television, and it's them in rehearsal. So I don't know how it came out, but I mean, have a listen to this. I wish I could listen to more of that, because it's all great, isn't it, Travis? That track, and it's that's them rehearsing, but it's beautiful, right?
Well, I think
it's
that's
lovely.
actually them recording they were doing some demos for Reno and Richard Williams of Island Records. I think that's where that material comes from, and it was bootlegged and put out as an album called Double Exposure, by which point television had already released Marquee Moon, I think. And bootlegs are interesting for punk, I think, particularly because there's an idea that punk itself is a back to basics movement, and it's a lot about the live performances, and also some of the groups didn't last that long, or members left. So that's television, I think, with Richard Hell still as a member of the band. Similarly, Buzzcocks, when Howard Devoto leaves the band, there's a bootleg called Time's Up, which collects together all the recordings that were with the full original band. But I think punk as well, that idea that it's another underground thing, it's a back to basics movement, it's DIY. That sort of encourages bootlegging, and a lot of it's also about it being live, it being very spontaneous, which goes back to the often lots of jazz bootlegs. Was the whole point that because jazz was improvised, and it may only be like a scratch group which just come together for that particular club session or something, then you get, if you bootleg that or have a recording of that, then you've got a unique sort of one-off document. The Sex Pistols famously, there's a couple of sort of Sex Pistols bootlegs. One of their gig at the Lesser Free Trade Hall in Manchester, has been released, which sounds like it's been recorded inside someone's school bag. And then there was a significant Sex Pistols bootleg called Spunk, yes, which again is sessions that were recorded for Dave Goodman for what would become Nevermind the Bollocks. And there are rumours about who possibly might have stuck this particular record. A figure relatively close to the band is suspected
with
of
the first name of Malcolm.
With the first name of Malcolm, a surname of McLaren, who, in partly, just out of spite and to kind of, to be the rebel, to play the ultimate kind of media card by releasing a record which gets, sounds, review it, claim it's, it's a lot better than Nevermind the Bollocks. It's like the true sound of the Sex Pistols.
So great, doesn't it? I mean, it sounds so good. A really good record anyway, but also rumours of collaboration between the artist and the sort of bootleg sort of thing. And
the management, shall we say, and the bootleg. I mean, again, it's. I mean, you think about punk with the fanzine scene, those idea of lots of Xeroxed material, copied material, and so it fits very well into that aesthetic as well. That you've got this, this slightly hand-fashioned version of the record floating about. I mean, the center of the record has a kind of gun. It's like it's on a blank record, is what it says. So the sort of pistol shooting blanks.
So there's always been this thing, isn't it, with the record labels or the BPI versus the bootleggers. And I just wanted to, we were talking about it earlier, there's this case from the BPI, here in the UK, where a certain, listen to this for a list of names: David Robert Jones, also known as David Bowie; Robert Zimmerman, also known as Bob Dylan; Dave Gilmour; Roger Waters, whose first name is George, he keeps that quiet; Nick Mason, middle name is Bentley.
That you choose Roger over George is in itself interesting, I suppose. I'd rather be known as Roger.
Richard Wright; Mick Fleetwood; Stephanie Nicks; John McPhee; Christy McPhee; Lindsay Buckingham; Elton Hercules John; Philip Wellens, I think that's / Phil Collins; Stephen Hackett; Mike Rutherford; Anthony Banksy from some band called Genesis; James Page; John Baldwin; Robert Plant; John Bonham from Led Zeppelin; Ian Anderson, is that Jethro Tull, is it?
Yeah.
Plus the RCA Corporation, RCA Limited, CBS Limited, EMI, WEA, Rocket Records Company, Charisma, Chrysalis, versus Mick Jones from Camden, bootlegger, who'd been infringing all the above's rights by selling bootlegs, and presumably they swooped on him or in Camden or at Portobello or something, confiscated his stuff, and then not quite sure what he'd been doing. Maybe he was the manufacturer and they sued him. But
I mean, the interesting cases of some artists in their careers at stages being very in favour of bootlegging. Bruce Springsteen comes to mind. He recorded quite a lot of concerts for FM radio in the States, and initially didn't seem to be too bothered about that happening because he thought it would help spread his music around America. But then a little bit later on, he got a little bit sniffier with one particular bootlegger, and he and his record company sued a woman called, I think her name was Vinyl Vicky, I think was her bootlegging name, and she lost quite a lot of money, and all her bootlegs had to be destroyed. So sometimes artists can be complicit in this if they think it is to their advantage. And I think, as you alluded to earlier, there's an element where, and Paul's great point about David Sylvian in a way, is that they can add to our appreciation of them, and also in some respects enhance the mystery of what it is they do well. Because a lot of bootlegs are of live performances or session work. So again, it's that thing of catching that little bit of a spontaneous performance, or a performance that's not going to be repeated, wouldn't be on the official list. So it's just being given this extra detail.
But the rarity aspect's gone, hasn't it? So it's like if you bought a bootleg in the 70s, 80s, 90s, you were a member of a small club of super fans, and no, it is on YouTube. You can watch it all, which is great. I like that too. But it's the need for that's gone. And I know, Travis, you also made a radio series recently about the antiques.
I did.
Aren't bootlegs? They're antiques now. They're valuable things.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing. Some of those bootlegs are worth money because they were very rare. They were rare at the time. They're even rarer now.
And the culture are important because they had an amazing effect, as you said, on the live album, on the whole outtake industry. They let us know, as Paul says, about the inner life, the sort of secret life of fans peeping behind the curtain and stuff. But maybe there isn't really any need for them in that sense anymore. But apart from maybe the collector's thing.
Well, I mean, maybe in a way nothing has changed in one respect, is that the superfan is still the superfan. The superfan that will buy everything will still be there buying those. In a sense, we have to remember in a way that the bootleg industry, while it was huge in the 70s and the 80s, was still... It's a small part of the record-buying public who was that fanatical enough to seek out bootlegs and collect them. Most people were quite happy with just the official releases.
Well, I mean, I wanted to talk a little bit about, or Paul could talk about, a super fan of his acquaintance who used to go to concerts with. He used to religiously record everything. And in fact, he wouldn't let Paul even talk during the concert in case he spoiled the recording, right, Paul?
I occasionally had trouble breathing next to him.
I
wasn't allowed to drink beer. We were Elliot Smith fans. I had a friend who, for some reason, I never really knew why, had to record everything we went to. So that personal DAT recorder had just come out. He religiously recorded. We'd have to stand in the middle of the room. It'd have to be virtually to the centimetre between the two PA speakers, whether it was at Dingwalls, whether it was Hammersmith. It doesn't matter on the quality of the PA. We would be 90-degree angle. It was perfect. Whether there was a big angry man next to us, we'd push him out of the way and we'd have to record, and Matt would glare at people that were talking. Anyway, he managed to record, I've got a set of 10 CDs, which... I think are quite a historical document now, obviously, because Elliot Smith has passed. Some are great recordings, to be honest. There were things that happened. He's a brilliant guitarist. He missed some notes. He's sometimes out of tune a little bit. But that's the beauty of live music, and I love hearing that.
I'm so tired, I haven't slept away. I'm so tired, my mind is on the... myself a drink. No, I'm so tired. I'm settling. I wonder, should I call you? But I know what you would do. You say, putting workers, no joke. Doing me harm, I can't sleep. I can't stop my drinking. It's 3 weeks. I'm going insane, Give you everything I got for a little piece of mind.
What a lovely recording. He was, of course, possibly infringing the Beatles' rights there, unless they actually paid them PRS money. And we possibly infringed somebody's rights during the making of this programme, right? Because who knows? It's all very complicated, isn't it? That's it for today. Thank you very much, Travis.
Pleasure.
Paul, thank you very much.
Pleasure again.
So that was it, and thank you to you, ladies and gentlemen, and anybody in between, or anybody who doesn't wish to be categorised by those descriptions. I hope you enjoyed that foray into the countercultural world of the bootleg vinyl record. And as I mentioned at the beginning, next episode we will be featuring another way that music has been illicitly used, sampling, with two aficionados, not to say practitioners of the art, DJ Food and John Moore of Cold Cut and Ninja Tune Records. Very much looking forward to that one. You can check out all our programmes at bureauoflostculture.com. If you listen via Apple, you can leave us a review if you choose. We'd like that. And we will see you, hear you next time. I'm Stephen Coates.